David, that's it from the newsroom for the moment. Back to you.
Helen, thank you. We'll see you again soon. One of the key announcements in tomorrow night's budget will be the introduction of a co-payment for GP services. So every time you go to the doctor, a fee of, it's expected, $7 will be required. This is to try and stop the ballooning cost of Medicare services to taxpayers, to the budget overall. And the idea was actually put to the government earlier this year by a former senior public servant and former health advisor to Tony Abbott when he was health minister, Terry Barnes, who is now with Cormorant Policy Advice. He joins me from Melbourne. Thanks for your time. Tell me firstly why you think we need a GP co-payment.
Well, basically, David, the Medicare system has served us well for the best part of 30 years now, and that's great. But with the pressures of an ageing population, the problems we have with chronic disease, particularly things like diabetes and mental illness, we need to be able to keep the general practice system working well and sustainably into the future.
And would it require, as is being discussed, a similar payment for emergency hospital visits so that you don't have people with minor ailments simply turning up at the emergency ward where they know it's going to be free?
That's right, David. I think the only practical way that a GP co-payment can actually be implemented is to ensure that emergency departments aren't seen as the alternative point of advice, so that people go for free advice and free services to the emergency department, therefore clogging up emergency department casualty wards and taking up the time of hard-working doctors and nurses when they should be actually staying in the general practice system. So it's quite reasonable to let the states charge $7 or maybe a little more as a deterrent from that.
And what do you think of the price that's being talked about for the GP co-payment? You suggested $6. It's now expected it'll be $7. We'll find out tomorrow night. But how did you arrive at the $6 figure, and what do you think of $7 or $7.50? Right.
What I did was simply update and index the original Hawke government co-payment of 1991, which was $3.50. And indexed to 2013, that actually just was under $6. So that's where the $6 came from. It wasn't plucked out of the air. It certainly wasn't made up, and it certainly had a rational policy basis to it. And it's simply continuing what the Hawke Labor government started 20 odd years ago. In terms of the $7, I think we have to wait and see the detail tomorrow night. But I'm assuming that, seeing I updated it to late 2013, that the government's actually indexing it into this financial year.
And what evidence is there? Is this possible to assess what impact this sort of co-payment will have on families and on the number of times they go to the doctor?
Well, I think the jury's out on that. I mean, you do hear some health experts and academics saying that the world will fall in, but again, there's a lot of educated guesswork in policy making. This is no exception. What I do think, though, is that $6 or $7 is a fair and reasonable price signal that is the right balance between giving people a message that going to the doctor, a world-class health service actually has a cost, but not deterring them from going to the doctor when they actually genuinely and necessarily need to go. Now, $15 as recommended by the Commission of Audit, the other week. So that's far too high. That's actually deterring people from going full stop. Now, I think that I got the balance right. I think the Hawke government got the balance right back in 1991.
Well, of course, the counter-argument to this is that co-payments, but out-of-pocket expenses have been growing for patients. I think they've gone from about $20 a year, $20 10 years ago to more than $48 now. And yet we are using more and more Medicare services. So the extra cost, out-of-pocket cost, hasn't actually slowed down the demand for Medicare services.
No, I think that's a fair point. But I think the other side to that is that 80% of general practitioner services, your basic trips to the doctor, are bulk billed. I think the current rate's about 82-83%. So to many people, that is a free good. And it's not just the general practitioner service that we're talking about here. It's actually what flows on from that: the referrals to specialists, the prescriptions, the admissions to hospital in some cases, and other chronic disease management services being provided through the GP. Now, these all come at a cost in themselves, so there are flow-ons from this. So if you get the balance right in terms of people accessing the health system through their GP as the gatekeeper, but not deterring them from getting necessary care, then there are potential not just for savings with GP rebates and Medicare, but also right down the line.
And finally, can I ask you, there's some talk the government will give GPs some discretion to waive this co-payment fee in cases of financial hardship, which sounds good in theory, but does it mean doctors then have to play a rather difficult role, on top of their already difficult role, in deciding who is financially struggling and shouldn't have to pay the fee?
Well, I think our culture, let alone our system, asks doctors to play God quite often now. And some of them actually quite enjoy it, I think. But in all seriousness, I think it's actually my original paper for the Australian Centre for Health Research, the think tank that commissioned this on a what-if basis, and now it's becoming reality. I actually recommended that doctors have that discretion, that they can waive a co-payment if they feel it's appropriate or in compassionate circumstances. And the other thing which is important is I recommended, and the government appears to be taking up, the essential notion that there must be a safety net, that it should be not an open slather on patients' liability to the co-payment, particularly when they're either less well off or they're dealing with chronic illness. So I suggested for $6, 12 services, that's $72 a year. Apparently the government is talking about 10 services, a maximum of $70 co-payment. So I think that's about right. And when you spread that cost over a year, it isn't that great.
Well, Terry Barnes, we'll see exactly what the government comes up with tomorrow night. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Pleasure, David.
After the break, we'll bring in our panel for a look at this busy week in politics, and in particular how the politics are going to play out in Budget Week. Graham Morris and Bruce Hawker, stay with us.